Hey YouTube, I'm Tactical Fork, and today we are going to be doing a little intro course to a Destiny mechanic that new players are probably not familiar with, and that's armor stats and mods. I've been wanting to put together a video like this for a little while now, and if you're watching this close to when it's published, there is some downtime currently in Season 15, and so it's provided the perfect opportunity for me to focus on this topic. I often ask myself, if I was a brand new player today in Destiny 2, what are some things that I would want to know? Now, luckily I had someone show me the ropes when I started, but not everyone has the same support. So I'm hoping this video can be that learning material for someone new. I'm guessing that at least a few people in the 1 million that have pre-ordered Witch Queen may be new lights who are anxious to become part of the community. So I thought we would start with something every player deals with, and whether consciously or not, armor. And not just armor, but the stats and the mods that armor pieces provide. So let's start things off with armor stats. You'll notice in your character menu that for each piece of armor you have to equip, there are 6 different stat categories, each of which has its own unique value. Let's go into what each of these stats mean for your character in the game. The first is mobility, which increases your movement speed and maximum jump height. This is also tied to the cooldown of the hunter class ability for dodge. Next up we have resilience. This increases the amount of damage you can take before dying. It also reduces the amount of damage you take when breaking out of stasis. This is tied to the cooldown of the Titan class ability, which is the barricade. Next we have recovery, which increases the speed at which you regain health. This is tied to the cooldown of the Warlock class ability, the Rift. Next we have discipline, which decreases the cooldown time of your grenade ability. You have intellect, which decreases the cooldown time of your super ability. And you have strength, which decreases the cooldown time of your melee ability. So for each armor piece you equip, you will gain stat points in all of these 6 categories, but with differing values since every armor piece stat distribution is unique. You'll notice that a single stat reading falls within a range from 1 to 100. You will never get a single armor piece to roll any one stat higher than 30 or lower than 2. So your full ability range is the sum of each armor piece stat. For example, on my hunter here, I have 5 armor pieces equipped and have a total mobility of 51, which is the sum of the mobility stats of all pieces of armor, which puts me in tier 5 for my movement speed and for my dodge ability, since mobility is tied to the cooldown for that ability for hunters. That's right. To add another layer on top of these armor stats, Bungie is converting your full stat score from 1 to 100 into a tier list. This essentially takes your full score, 51 in our example, and divides it by 10 and rounds it down to determine what tier your corresponding ability cooldown is in. This is all shown in-game in your character screen, complete with a cooldown time that you can see at the bottom of this little pop-up menu here, where it says the next tier, tier 6, base speed increase 24%. And we're currently at tier 5, which is a 20% increase to my dodge ability. So you can see that in my mobility example here, I land at tier 5 because of the rounding down. For those of you out there who want to be super efficient and min-maxing the hell out of your character, this would equate to only 1 wasted armor stat point. But you can see for something like strength, where I have 77, I would essentially be wasting 7 stat points there because I'm only at tier 7, which would be a straight 70 for my actual ability stat. 77 really gets me nothing. I don't gain any advantage until I get to 80 for my strength, which means I would then be at tier 8. So if you're really interested in trying to minimize the amount of wasted stats, that's always something good to look at. But a lot of that depends on your inventory of other great armor pieces that have high stats in the areas you're looking for, but something to keep in mind. As a final note in this section for base armor stats, I also want to mention that you can masterwork your armor to apply an additional +2 stat points to each category for an additional 12 points overall. So you can see down here in the corner that I have these little gold bars at the end of all my stat distributions. That's because this piece has been fully masterworked to 10 energy. So I get an additional +2 bonus on each of these stats. So the current total is 78, but really the base total for this particular helmet piece would be this -12, so a 66 stat. So another good way to help kind of boost your overall stat distribution and hopefully get the armor that you're looking for. Next up, we have abilities. Stat tiers, as we spoke about in the previous section, are important to remember because all those stat points of your armor are what ultimately affect the ability buff or cooldown range you fall into for each stat. This has been further complicated by the fact that in update 3.4 on December 7th, 2021, Bungie introduced variable ability cooldowns, which now affect each ability differently for every subclass in the game. For instance, the discipline stat that controls the cooldown of your grenade ability changes based on the class and subclass you're choosing. Before this patch, every light subclass, that's Arc, Void, and Solar, the grenade recharge was 33 seconds at 100 discipline. It was the same no matter what. After this patch was released, grenade cooldowns ranged from 24 seconds to up to 3 minutes at the same discipline level. So you can see that here, if I look at my Arc Bolt grenade and my Arc Strider subclass, you can see the base cooldown for that grenade is just over 2 minutes. Whereas if I go switch to my Void subclass and look at my Vortex grenade, you can see the base cooldown is only 1 minute and 45 seconds. So because of this, I encourage you to do some individual research on the topic, if for no other reason than saving this video from becoming the length of a feature film. Bungie has taken great care in balancing the power versus recharge rate of these grenades and other abilities to further balance each class and subclass with each other. Regardless of the specific percentages and values, the premise stays the same. You want to spec into abilities that you enjoy using or that work well with your class. The purpose of this video is really to cover the basics and provide the high-level information that governs the armor stat and ability rules in Destiny 2. With that information, hopefully after some playtime, you can make your own judgment call on what abilities and stats you want to run with. If it matters, I'll share my personal thoughts. 1. Generally, for all classes, I like to keep armor pieces that have high stat distributions in mobility, recovery, and/or intellect. I mainly run Hunter, which we're using here as an example, so that mobility is important not only for movement speed, but to get my dodge back quickly. Gotta crutch on that invis, man. Recovery and intellect, I like to try and get naturally high stat spikes in those armor pieces because the mods to boost those stats are more costly. We'll get to that soon. Second, high intellect. Right now, I have a base intellect of this armor of 50 is not as important anymore due to that same 3.4 patch last December that introduced variable ability cooldown. Intellect was also massively reworked. Super energy is now primarily generated by dealing and taking damage, and the passive super regen, which would be your straight intellect stat, has been substantially reduced, leaving Guardians waiting 2 to 3 times longer for their super to regen passively than before the patch. And finally, remember your class ability and what stat that is tied to. I just mentioned high mobility for Hunter, but maybe you want to be able to pop your barricade at a moment's notice on Titan. You better boost your resilience for that. Mine is sitting at 35 for Hunter, and I'd say in most cases, I don't necessarily recommend maxing this. But again, if you want that barricade up all the time for Titan, it's a good idea to spec high into this for your armor. The same goes for Warlock, except you want to max your recovery as you can throw down riffs like sick beats. While we're on the topic of Warlocks, I also specifically like high discipline, which is your grenade cooldown, because Warlocks get some of the most creative grenade abilities, specifically Shadebinder stasis turrets. Those are just too nutty not to boost if you can. And that takes us to mods. So up to this point, we've covered armor and the general stats and distribution combinations. We also talked about how those stats impact abilities and their cooldowns. In terms of how to best optimize and fine-tune your armor stats, there is another option, and that is to boost them with armor mods. Most pieces of armor have 4 available mod slots. The first is a general mod. This is where you can add additional stat boosts to your base stat roll. Each stat has a minor and a major stat bump that you can apply to get a +5 or +10 to the selected stat respectively. Next up, we have 2 armor piece specific mods. So for helmets, you'll find your ammo finder mods and your targeting mods in these slots. Same is true in both of them, so you can interchange. One can be a targeting mod, one could be a finder mod. For gauntlets, specifically, you'll find any seasonal champion mods. Those will commonly find their way in here, so you can equip those. And you'll also find loader mods and dexterity mods. Your loader mods will increase reload speed for a certain weapon type. Your dexterity mods will increase the ready and stow speed for a certain gun type. For chest pieces, you'll commonly have your reserve mods, which grant you additional ammo, and your unflinching mods, as well as a handful of defensive mods like concussive dampener, snipe or melee resist, and in this case arc resist because of my arc elemental affinity. We'll get to that later. For leg armor, you'll have your holster mods, which will slowly reload your firearms when they're holstered. And you also have your scavenger mods for getting bonus reserves and picking up ammo for a certain weapon type. And finally, for your class item mods, these will be your finisher mods for certain things like getting special ammo on finishers. And you'll also have your class ability regen mods. So distribution is an example of that, reducing all ability cooldowns when using your class ability. You'll also notice that there are other seasonal mods that you'll get on your class item as well. These aren't necessarily champion specific like overload or anti-barrier, but there are some other pretty nasty mods that you can get and equip here, like particle deconstruction in season 15. Beyond those stats, normally the 4th armor slot will be your combat style slot. This includes a wide array of elemental wells, charged with light mods, and Warmind cell mods. At the risk of, again, getting too in-depth on any of this, I encourage you to check out what these mods do. But oftentimes your elemental well mods will generate or use elemental wells in a unique way based on, again, element or more generic types. Your charged with light mods will work in conjunction with becoming charged with light and then expending that charge with light in certain ways. We'll go over an example of that in a minute. Now, I did say when we started this mod section that you commonly or most likely have 4 available mod slots. There are examples of armor pieces where you'll have more than 4 slots. One of those being Artifice armor. Artifice armor is one of the exceptions to that 4 mod slot rule and provides a 5th slot to your armor piece. This armor specifically drops from the new Grasp of Avarice dungeon on master difficulty. So if you want that additional slot, that is the dungeon activity that you'll have to grind. And this slot is simply here to provide another option for available seasonal mods specific to that armor piece. So again, on our gauntlets, we have anti-champion mods available here. So that's all you see for this 5th slot here are those seasonal mods. Another example of an armor piece that has 5 slots is raid armor. So if I go here, this Prime Zealot gloves, this is a raid piece from Vault of Glass. And you'll notice here that I have a 5th slot with unique armor mods that I can slot that can only be used for raid specific mods, which these are usually tailored to mechanics of that raid. So anyone familiar with Vault of Glass may know, about some of these and why they would potentially make a difference in that raid. I actually don't use these a whole lot because you're tied down to using, a very specific armor piece to slot these things into. But they're here as an available 5th slot. If you happen to be doing that raid, you could potentially equip, 1 or up to 5, raid armor pieces, and then work with these armor mods to help with the encounters in that raid. Again, I feel like this 5th armor slot on raid armor is a little less effective than the artifice armor because these raid mods are only active during that raid, whereas the artifice armor you could use anytime. So for any other activity where you may need, an additional champion mod or something like that, you could use those in other activities as well. So within the armor piece specific and combat style mod slots, you will also see that some mods are specific to particular elements: arc, solar, void, or stasis. So like we looked at before, you have a little solar symbol on this mod for impact induction. That means that this mod is only available on armor pieces that are of a solar elemental affinity. So you'll want to get familiar with which mods belong with which element based on the kind of build you're looking to craft. A common survivability build might include a combat style mod like Taking Charge, which allows me to become charged with light by picking up orbs of power. You can then pair that with another combat style mod like Protective Light, which, while you're charged with light, you'll gain a significant damage resistance against combatants when your shields are destroyed. So this essentially means anytime your shield cracks and you're low health, you gain a significant resistance to additional damage. Now notice that Protective Light is a void combat style mod, while Taking Charge is not tied to any specific element at all. So this one could go on any armor piece you want, but if you want Protective Light to pair with that, you will need at least one void armor piece. There are also some combat style mods that can boost certain armor stats. So like we were talking about before with these stats and the way we can boost them, we do have other options here. One of those is Powerful Friends. This is an arc mod, and if you equip it along with another arc charged with light mod or another arc mod at all in the same armor piece, you can see in its stat description you gain plus 20 mobility. So where we were at 51 before on our armor stat, you can now see that has jumped to 71 mobility. So we've gone from tier 5 to tier 7 with 2 mods getting equipped. Another one that does something similar is Radiant Light, which is right here. It's another arc mod as well, and its buff is essentially the same. So you need this paired with another arc mod or another arc combat style mod to gain plus 20 strength. So again, if I look at my strength, where we were previously at 67, we are now at 87. Now, I will say that for both mods, while they do provide the benefit of a serious stat boost, they are not necessarily designed with that as their primary function. They can prove expensive and be hard to fit into a build depending on what you are trying to achieve. Obviously, if you want to try and run both to get a stat boost of plus 20 strength and plus 20 mobility, you would need 2 separate arc armor pieces in your set, since these both take up the same combat style mod slot on a single piece of arc armor. And again, Radiant Light costs 3 energy and Powerful Friends costs 4. So they do take up a considerable chunk of your available energy slots on a single piece of armor. So depending on what piece that goes on, you may find yourself running out of other mods that you want instead of that. Conversely, there are also some of these combat style mods, like you'll notice with Protective Light, that actually pose a stat penalty when you equip them. You can see here in the stat description for Protective Light that it actually takes away 10 strength from my total armor stats. So some of these are kind of a give and take. Protective Light is great in game for survivability and high-end PvE activities because it's helping you live longer. If your shield breaks, you're getting a substantial damage resistance buff. That comes at a stat penalty of removing some of your strength, which is the ability that controls your melee. So again, it's a give and take. It's a balancing act depending on the build you're going for and your play style to help kind of piece all this together. Similarly to our variable refresh rate strategy, I encourage you to take some time to check out what's available for each element and try some of them out. Beyond mods, the introduction of the stasis subclass and its associated fragments add yet another complicating factor in the world of stat totals. You'll notice that if you have your stasis subclass equipped, your stat totals may change based on your currently equipped fragments. Note that this will also be the case for the new Void 3.0 update when Witch Queen launches on February 22nd, 2022. So you'll notice here for some of these fragments like Whisper of Durance, in its stat description, it adds plus 10 strength. So kind of ironic that our Protective Light took away 10, this could add 10. So if you're running stasis and that, it's kind of a sum of 0, no change. Some of these other ones add stat boosts to multiple stats. Whisper of Conduction adds plus 10 resilience and plus 10 intellect. And the list goes on. So it's some of these do, some of these don't. But again, it's something to pay attention to. If you're noticing that your stats are changing, stasis fragments may be why. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you found it helpful in your understanding of armor stats and abilities and what can affect them. Please consider giving the video a like and subscribe to my channel for more Destiny 2 content. If you want to see more of this and actual Destiny action happening live, I also stream over on Twitch every week. The link to my channel is down below in the video description. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all next time.